Hawa. Shalom, Shabbatah, peace up, tribe. Yes, the final video of the corn video series, part 4 of this lesson. And I just wanted to finish this series before I continued with my other videos and topics that I'm currently working on. First of all, just a little recap of the first 3 parts. Now, we already know and learned corn was not introduced to the old world by Columbus. We have shown and proven it existed way before he came to America and supposedly brought it back with him, right? Like Encyclopedia Britannica teaches us today. That's a complete lie. We've already proven that. We showed countless records of maize or corn in existence in India, Europe, Asia, Egypt, Babylon, Africa, etc., basically everywhere, before any Columbus ships arrived to America. All right. In part 3, we actually showed how corn was, a key factor through agriculture, which helped, early nomadic people settle down, and start civilizations, towns, cities, grouping up, making pueblos. We know corn, is native plant to America, and so with that, we know that when we read, these tales and tablets of the ancient peoples, their hieroglyphs, their stories, their gods, mythology, and their rise to civilization, that it was over here on this side of the world, and which later on was brought over to the other side as mythology or the age of the gods, right? They're just retelling a story, when the land was connected, most probably. In every part of this, series, we read how maize or corn was one of the first plants grown, and it was given to the people by the gods. There's a lot of mythology and legends. They talk about, the gods gave it that. We're going to see that with the Native Americans as well, and how it was somehow genetically modified to become the corn that we have today. Mysteriously, they don't know who did it. From a simple plant called teosinte. Corn doesn't grow wild, we read, right? So it needs our help to grow it, man's. So we're gonna, dive more into this on this video and make a final correlation, which is why I first started this series, that corn is all over the Bible, the Old Testament. And of course, this would be no mystery to us who have been taking this journey of reawakening and remembering, because we know that, the true Hebrews, right, the so-called lost tribes and the Old Testament were on this side of the world, if you've seen my past videos, right? So before I start, I would like to just address a statement or comment someone made on one of these corn videos I uploaded. He said something about, what is the purpose of these corn videos? He was a little upset, you can tell. And how does this help, advance the Aboriginal people of America? First of all, if it's still not clear how it helps, then even if I explained it and showed it in so many ways in these videos, this person will not understand, And second, this is my YouTube channel. I'm not here to only to do videos that interest a particular person or a particular subject. There is a reason for the videos I upload, and what I upload first, then next. I'm leading to something, but like all lessons, or teachings, it has to go in a certain order, in a way that I could, say it, and a way I can put it out to you, because I'm going to be talking about some deep stuff later on, and I need you to understand the foundational truths behind all these things. All right? So there is a, again, there is a reason with this corn series. I hope that I basically can have, or I have provided you a subject, or a tool, something that can be researched, that can prove that this is the old world, and that we are the oldest civilizations that started. Just follow my ease and you will see. Do the research from my video, all that I've presented, and keep going with it. Alright, now let's get on with this video. Again, thanks for being here. Once again, I hope you enjoy this one, and let's continue the journey. Alright, so first we're going to talk about masa, right? Masa. And for most Latin Americans and Hispanics, they, we know what masa is. We make that a lot. We use it a lot in our dishes, and a lot of countries do. And so masa, for those who don't know, as it says here, masa is a maize, corn, flour, or dough that has been soaked and cooked in all in an alkaline solution in the nixtamalization process. It is used for making corn tortillas, tamales, pupusas, and many other Latin American dishes. The full name is masa de maíz. The dried and powdered form is called masa de harina, and sometimes maseca, the name of a leading commercial brand. It is reconstituted with water before use. Alright, so you see you can make flour or dough, right? And what can you do with flour? You can bake so many other things, including bread. Alright? Alright, again, so we're going to talk about nixtamalization a little bit more. And the process of making the bread, the dough, right? So it says nixtamalization is the first step in making a tamale, a taco, or a hominy. It's a 3,000-year-old method of removing the pericarp. 3,000-year-old method. And we're going to see why this is important, right? 3,000-year-old method of removing the pericarp, that thin outer layer from a kernel of corn. Dried corn is soaked in an alkaline solution, a soup of water and wood ashes, slaked lime or lye for a few hours, rinsed in cold water, and rubbed. The pericarp either dissolves or slips right off. What's amazing about nixtamalization is that it doesn't just remove the pericarp, it significantly changes the chemistry of the endosperm, the starchy innards of the kernel, making it better tasting, more easily ground, and capable, with the addition of little water, of being worked into masa, the basis of tamales, tortillas, and almost every other corn-based Mexican delight. American cornbread is made with a cornmeal batter because an unnixtamalized corn lacks the emulsifying agents necessary for binding. Alright, so it says here, history, Mesoamerica. The ancient process of nixtamalization was first developed in Mesoamerica, where maize was originally cultivated. Alright, so it says here that the first people doing this was in this side of the world, right? Nixtamalization. We're going to see why I'm mentioning this. And also from our previous video, we see that it wasn't just in Mexico, right, that originally cultivated this, because they found fossilized corns in Peru. This was a new discovery, right? So, but let's continue. There is no precise date when the technology was developed, but the earliest evidence of nixtamalization is found in Guatemala's southern coast, with equipment dating from 1200 to 1500 BC, says here in Wikipedia, right? The ancient Aztec and Mayan civilizations developed nixtamalization using slaked lime, calcium hydroxide, and ash, potassium hydroxide, to create alkaline solutions. The Chibcha people to the north of the ancient Inca also used calcium hydroxide, also known as cal, while the tribes of North America used naturally occurring sodium carbonate, or ash. Now, along with flour and dough, all the rest of the food items you can make with corn, you could also make fermented drinks, or beer, or non-alcoholic beverages, such as chicha. It says here in South and Central America, chicha is a fermented or non-fermented beverage, usually derived from grains, maize, or fruit. Chicha includes corn beer, known as chicha de jora, or jora, and non-alcoholic beverages, such as chicha morada. Alright, so this is important because we're going to see later on who else was famous for making beers and at what time in history. So let's dig into what I'm trying to say. So it says here, the cuisine of ancient Egypt covers a span of over 3,000 years, but still retained many consistent traits until well into Greco-Roman times. The staples of both poor and wealthy Egyptians were bread and beer. Bread and beer, right? And often accompanied by greens, shooted onions, other vegetables, and to a lesser extent meat, game, and fish. Alright, so we know that they started making nixtamalization right about 3,000 years ago, just like it says here. The cuisine of the Egyptians can go back 3,000 years, and you can make bread with corn, and we just saw you can make beer with corn. Alright, so are they talking about different things or the same thing? Alright, so Wikipedia tells us that masa with two S's, right? It says here from Latin, masa, from ancient Greek, wasa or masa, bread, masa, bread. In Greek, in ancient Greek, it means bread. For noun, you can see in the bottom says mase, plural mases, a paste or dough. And as well as over here, it says from ancient Greek, masa, right? It says noun, masa, in ancient Greek, barley cake. So now they're saying it's barley, but you can see that it's making cake as well. So masa is known to the ancient Greeks. All right. As an alternative, Old World names for maize or flatbread should be considered. We have, for example, the Egyptian mizr, grain of Egypt, or masa, dough or flatbread, Jewish masa, and Greek masa for flatbread. There is archaeological evidence in Thompson 1994 for seafarers from all these countries visiting, mapping, colonizing the Caribbean region prior to Columbus. It says here, Jeffries 1971 381 gives the following names for maize in India: maca, which maybe just a switch of words would be masa, right? Just switch the K to an S. Makai, Mecca Cholam, Mocha Jona, Mecca Jola. He assumes that the terms involved in Mecca or Makkah are references to the Arabian city of Mecca, but they could be derivatives of the ancient Egyptian Masa or Masa. And continue here, says the Greeks could grow emmer and barley, but those didn't make great bread. Barley and emmer could be used for soups, stews, and porridges. Bread was often barley cakes or flat bread. Barley cakes were called masa. Again, masa, we know what masa is now, right? The Romans called the Greeks barley eaters. The porous barley bread would often even contain chaff in it, as the flour wouldn't have been finely sifted. Alright, so it's telling us that barley and emmer are not good for making bread. Alright, you know what's good for making bread. The only wheat or that can do this is maize. It's the best one to use. Alright, let's continue. Greece wasn't a great place to grow wheat. It was imported. Consequently, wheat flour was very late to come along as a food item. Some ordinary households would have ovens made of pottery, allowing them to make their own bread. After the 5th century BC, when bakers appeared in the cities, bread could also be bought from stalls in the markets. So as we have read and heard already, the Egyptians were referred to being a people that ate a lot of bread. And the Greeks were known to eat a lot of bread, but the Romans called them barley eaters because they would say it's made from barley, because corn, again, is an American plant, so they don't know what corn is. All right, they associate it to just a family of wheat or barley, right? So just to continue, I just want to emphasize this. What I think is interesting is the Jewish masa or matzah, right? Almost the same word, So it says here, what is matzah? Unleavened bread was one of the foods the Jews in Egypt were commanded to eat along with the Paschal lamb, Exodus 12:8, in commemoration of that first Seder meal. The first Seder meal, you hear that? And the haste in which the Israelites left Egypt, giving them no time to allow their bread to rise. Continuing, it says, we eat matzah at the Seder, and instead of bread throughout the holiday. So instead of bread, they probably mean, the official bread, right? But this is very interesting because it's telling us that it was the first kind of meal or food that helped them during the slavery days, right? And we already gone over many times, Egypt was over here. So we know what masa is, was corn. So you see what they were eating, right? And you see where they get this tradition and why it's called matzah. All right, let's continue with this page. It's called myjewishlearning.com, so you can go look for it yourself. And continuing in the same page says, the meaning of matzah. Matzah, or masa, as we have been learning, right, is one of those wonderful transcendent ritual items in Judaism, a symbol embodying a duality to teach a moral lesson. At the beginning of the Seder, we break one of the sheets of matzah and call it the bread, lechem, of affliction. Oni, it is the meager sustenance of slaves, the meanest fare of the poor, the quickly produced food of those who make a hurried, under cover of dark getaway. Yet later it represents freedom, the bread we ate when we were liberated from Egyptian bondage. Alright? We know ancient Egypt was here in America. We know the Hebrews and Israelites were on this side of the world. So you can see that masa, right, corn, or matzah, was what they ate, the food of the slaves. We read that in part 2 and 3, that it was the food of the slaves, and the pharaohs ate the sweet corn, the fruit, right? So as you can see, this correlation of this word, just switch some letters around, masa, matzah, it's the same thing. So what is matzah made out of? According to Google, matzo is a bland cracker-like flatbread made out of white plain flour and water. Alright, it's going to tell us plain white flour here. Of course, in modern times, they probably make it like that, but we know better now. We know that, corn, you can make flour as well, corn flour, right? We read that earlier with maseca. And if we're talking about ancient Egypt and Israelites, we know we're talking about corn. It says here, it is a substitute for bread during Passover. What better substitute for bread can you have other than corn, right? A holiday in which Jews refrain from eating bread, leavened products, or the 5 grains known as barley, spelt rye, oats, and wheat in any processed form except dry roasting and as matzo. So you see, right? So it's something they eat instead of the 5 grains. And again, they're not going to put it here so we can correlate. But what better substitute are they talking about? Corn. I mean, what would be a better substitute? Do you see where I'm going with this, people? Do you see how they play with us? Do you see how these proxy Jews, these fake Jews, right, take our traditions and then just switch them up, and then they follow them, they practice them every year, but they don't understand really where it comes from, the foundational truth that I was speaking of in the beginning. Alright, so let's continue with the video. Alright, continuing. I got this from Ancient History Encyclopedia, right? And it says here, under Babylonian rule, Mesopotamian beer production increased dramatically, became more commercialized, and laws were instituted concerning it, as paragraphs 108 and 110 of the Code of Hammurabi make clear. It says 108, if a tavern keeper, feminine, does not accept corn according to gross weight in payment of drink, but takes money, and the price of drink is less than that of the corn, she shall be convicted and thrown into the water. And so on for 109 and 110, right? So on the bottom it says Law 108 had to do with those tavern keepers who poured short measures of beer in return for cash instead of corn, which could be weighed and held to a measure. To cheat their customers, they would be drowned if caught doing so. And continuing from this website, Ancient History Encyclopedia, says here, with the supply of mind-blowing beverages on hand, human civilization was often running in what might be called the beer before bread hypothesis. The desire for drink may have prompted the domestication of key crops, which led to permanent human settlements. Again, correlating what we've been learning, right? And we know that we can make beer out of corn, and we know that corn helped basically the first nomadic settlers become civilized or create cities, right? City-states. Scientists, for instance, have measured atomic variations within the skeletal remains of New World humans. The technique known as isotope analysis allows researchers to determine the diets of the long deceased. When early Americans first tamed maize around 6000 BC, they were probably drinking the corn in the form of wine rather than eating it, analysis has shown. And continuing from this site, this company that makes beers called Kazbegi, Tradition and Quality, I found this history in their website, which was interesting. It says, archaeologists think that beer was the most popular drink in ancient Babylon, 6,000, 8,000 years ago. The Babylonians used to crush barley and maize grain with stone, pour water, add some aromatic herbs, and in a few days, a pleasant, invigorating drink would be ready. Now you heard that, right? So they use what? Crushed barley and maize. And we know that the Greeks relating barley with masa. Masa is maize, so it could be the same thing. All right. In independent principality of Ur in Mesopotamia, beer was made professionally for sale. It was produced in such quantities that almost half of all the grain crops were processed into malt. Hop was not used then. You see that? So they tell us, today's beer is made mostly of hops, right? But back then it wasn't used. Why not? Because remember, this is the old world, and when they're talking about ancient Babylon, ancient Egypt, they're talking about this side. And we see that it was barley, maize, says here, grain that was used on a stone, pour water. You see, it's like nixtamalization, all right? And we know that, you can make chicha, right? Beer from corn. So I hope you see what I'm trying to say, all right? So again, we know corn is very old here in our side of the world. America is part of our, food, our tradition, our dishes, and it's very important to us as we have seen in the third video, for us, helped us, start civilization, settle down. We can trace this back 9,000 years, as you can see. This is from the New York Times, all right? So knowing that the ancient Egyptians, primary food was bread, right? And we know that ancient Egyptians was over here. We're correlating that with masa bread, right? Made out of corn, and also the Jewish matzah, right? Is what the slaves ate, right? During bondage, the Israelites, and something they continually do every year as to remember. Well, as it says here, corn was eaten at almost every Native American meal. Corn, also known as maize, was an important crop to the Native American Indian. Eating at almost every meal, this was one of the Indians' main foods. Corn was found to be easily stored and preserved during the cold winter months. Often, the corn was dried to use later. Dried corn was made into hominy by soaking corn into water until the kernels split open. These would be drained over fire, fried over fire. So again, we will read later on that, what did Joseph's dreams tell Pharaoh? That he had to store, right, corn. In King James Version, it tells you corn. And as you can see here, corn was found to be easily stored and preserved during cold winter months or during times of famine. We'll read later on. It says, continuing, American Indians would also ground corn into cornmeal. They would use mortars and pesties made from either rock or wood. Corn was placed into the hollowed out mortar, and then by pounding the corn with the pestle, this would grind it up into a powdery form. Cornmeal could then be used for cornbread, corn syrup, or corn pudding. Often cornmeal was mixed with beans to make succotash or thicken other foods. And it says, men cutting corn with sickles. Detail of a wall painting in the tomb of Menas, scribe of the fields and estate inspector under Pharaoh Thutmose IV, 18th dynasty, 1614 BC, it says, in the cemetery of Sheikh Abd al-Qurna. Photographed by Eric Lesson. Labors of the field, clearing wood, plowing, etc. And so as you can see, it first said cutting down corn with sickles. Alright. As well as you can see the plowing, it's for grains that need to be planted deeply, not like the wheat grains, as we will read about later. That's a different way of planting. So it says here, harvesting corn rows versus dense stands of wheat. Peruvians planted maize in widely separated rows that allowed sufficient space for a llama with baskets to walk between the corn stalks during the harvest. Likewise, Babylonian corn rows, above right it says, but it's actually in the bottom left, provided sufficient room for mounted soldiers to ride his horse between rows. A dense stand of wheat in Egypt, below left, rose only to the level of workers' shoulders. So wheat is a little shorter than corn. And the Egyptians clearly showed the difference. They showed wheat when they painted it, or they put in the hieroglyphs, a little shorter, and then they showed the corn a little taller, right? With the corns right on the top corn, like we have in many parts of America as well still. And in Babylon, the depictions of the corn there as well. So continuing, corn plants in Egypt, bottom center, were higher than a worker's head, as seen in this illustration from a papyrus book of the dead in the Berlin Egyptian Museum. We see a similar scene in Oaxaca, Mexico, where a farmer reaches for a corn cob. Alright, so corn is depicted a lot taller than wheat in all these hieroglyphics, right, in Babylon and Egypt. Alright, you gotta notice the difference. So continuing with how wheat and the other grains and corn is grown, how different it is. The Middle Eastern legacy, two kinds of farming. A French illustration from the 18th century shows two distinct methods of large field farming, small grain or wheat farming, and two large grains or corn row farming. In the first example above, the farmer drives a horse with a rake or harrow, or you can use an ox, right, or a cow, right, or an ox. A. Across the field to prepare the grounds for planting. Next comes the seed carrier. B. With a bag full of grain, and he scatters fistfuls of wheat seeds across the surface by throwing them in the broadcast or scattering fashion. Well, finally, a teamster driving a draft horse pulls a rolling log. C. Across the field to drive in or turn in the seeds. This is similar method to the modern practice of planting grass seeds for lawn. In the second scene, a lady farmer wheels a mechanical seed dropper down a furrow. The mechanical device, invented by Gerald Tool 1700, allows large seeds, usually maize, to drop out into the furrow at regular intervals. The woman's husband follows with a plow to cover up the seed corn with about 2 inches of soil. So you see what's been going on, right? When we look at these pictures and drawings, you can see here in Babylon and Egypt, you see what they're doing, right? They're planting corn. They're planting grains that need to be put into the soil deeply. This is not for wheat, barley, or any of the other grains they're saying that they're using for bread, right? This is corn they're using. Look at it. You got to use your senses. You know, it's been in front of us this whole time. It's always been there. This is how you plant corn. And this is how you would plant, in most cases, wheat, barley, and all the other grains. You can just scatter it. You don't need these big ox helping you make these deep ditches to plant the soil, the grain, deep, 2 inches under the soil, like you would need to with corn. All right, so get this in your head so you can see. When you start seeing these hieroglyphs, these drawings, these pictures, it's clearly showing you you're planting corn. All right, so we're gonna start diving into corn's significance in these ancient cultures and civilizations regarding their gods and their religions, right? So it says here, the Gauls had corn in Caesar's time. One is curious to know where they and the Teutons found it to sow. People answer you that the Tyrians had brought it into Spain, the Spaniards into Gaul, and the Gauls into Germany. And where did the Tyrians get this corn? Among the Greeks, probably, from whom they received it in exchange for their alphabet. So the Greeks, right? So we know earlier we read that flatbread, right, was made out of masa, right? We know masa is corn. Now this is correlating, saying the Greeks introduced it to all these cultures, right? So it continues, says, who had made this present to the Greeks, though? It was formerly Ceres, the goddess Ceres, right? Without a doubt. And when one has gone back to Ceres, one can hardly go farther. Ceres must have come down on purpose from the sky to give us wheat, rye, barley, etc. But as the credit of Ceres, who gave corn to the Greeks, and that of Iseth or Isis, who bestowed it on the Egyptians, is very much falling in these days. We remain uncertain as to the origin of corn. So it's admitting that today they're not relating it with corn, but that it used to. All right, it was corn they were talking about. So continuing, says Sanconiaton, the Phoenician historian, right, affirms that Dagon, or Dagon, one of the grandsons of Thoth, right, which is very interesting if you've been following my Thoth videos, had control of corn in Phoenicia, right? Corn in Phoenicia. Well, his thought is of about the same time of our Jared. From this, it results that corn is very old and that it is the same antiquity as grass. Perhaps this Dagon was the first man to make bread, but that is not demonstrated. All right, so they're talking about making bread, and the first person to do that in Phoenicia, right, Dagon, and out of corn. And we're going to read later how Dagon or Dagon is another word for grain of corn in the Bible or in ancient times.
Alright, so we heard Isis being mentioned as a corn goddess as well. So it says here, Isis, the wife of Osiris, right? Love story appealed to human emotions, gave Osiris a cross with the loop at the top known as the Ankh. Woman loved her. Believed she taught first women to grind corn, spin flax, weave cloth, and care for children. So Isis, the Egyptian legend says that she was the first one to teach women how to grind corn, right? And what is that? Nixtamalization, right? To make bread or the dough. We saw that it was started 3,000 years ago, nixtamalization, and also that Egyptian cuisine goes back 3,000 years, the same time. All right, so let's continue. Moving on to America, it says here, for some Mesoamerican cultures, Chicomecolt was one of the most important agrarian goddesses. She is considered one of the oldest deities and is counted as one of several maize divinities, though her reach was much farther. She is the goddess of all nourishment, seen as the protector of all food and drink. She is credited with being the first to make tortillas and other delicious and exquisite dishes and stews. So how do you make tortillas again, right? We got to get the dough, right? So what we have to do, we have to grind the corn and add the water, the alkaline to, nixtamalization, right? So she was the first to make tortillas, and we just read that Isis was the first to teach women how to grind corn. All right? It says, at the time of the conquest, she was honored with temples in central Mexico. Now, so again, we're going to start seeing a trend of gods introducing maize, right? Or the gods being given credit for introducing maize, and not just in America, but many cultures in the world, right? As we just read with Isis and Ceres. We're going to continue with that, but I just wanted to read this part. First, says here, the corn myth in Mesoamerica. The myth that you have just read came from the Nahua region in central Mexico. Many versions of the discovery of corn have cropped up throughout the Mesoamerica, especially the Maya region. These stories are similar and center on the gods' search for the ideal food to give to humankind. Alfredo Lopez Austin explains to us that this same myth can be found over such a large geographical area because it is part of the Mesoamerican tradition, not uniquely Aztec nor Maya, so it's all over the Mesoamerica, and that includes most of Central America. It reaches all the way to Costa Rica from Mexico. It says that had strong cultural traits from as far north as the modern day states of Baja California and Chihuahua down to El Salvador and Honduras. The immense territory that formed Mesoamerica was a place of constant interaction between cultures and peoples. It became the seat of a strong, wide place native tradition. So they're talking about corn, right? The origins and where it came from in mythology. So we know of a very, important god to the Maya, right? Or Aztec. It says the Quetzalcoatl, right? It says here in the picture, and 5 grass flanks of a corn plant that symbolizes the axis mundi, a sacred point that pierces and connects the heavens, earth, and underworld with its leaves, stalk, and roots. This is from the Codex Borgia. All right, so as you can see, if you notice, it is a cross, and we have to really understand where all these symbols come from, the foundational truth behind what they hijacked, as you can, if you remember from my thought videos, you can see the bird right on top, right? The bird plays a significant role. That's how they also depict the phoenix, on top of a tree in ancient Phoenicia and ancient Egypt, so we can see that corn is very important to the Native Americans on this side. It's very, very important. It's all over their religious drawings and philosophy. Corn, So as we can see, you can see like a couple of corn ears coming out of here, right? All right, so let's continue. It says corn was highly valued staple in the Americas, and together with the other vital crops of beans and squash, the grouping was named the Three Sisters, our supporters, in accordance with the belief that the plant also embodied female spirits. All right, Mother Corn herself, the nurturing creatrix and sustainer, was held in the highest esteem as shown in the following creation story. So, just like we have, the father and the mother, right? And I'm not talking about earthly ones, just like the framer and the shaper for the Mayas. You can see that, like in Proverbs 8, right? Wisdom, right? What is wisdom, right? Wisdom is referred to as her, right? The feminine part. Without her, we wouldn't have wisdom. It says here, now, once all living things were in the womb of Mother Earth, Corn Mother caused all things to have life and start to move towards the surface of the earth. With Corn Mother's help, the people were born onto the surface of the earth. But because the people did not know how to care for themselves, they started to wander. Finally, the Arikara came to be a beautiful land where they found everything they needed to live. A woman of great beauty came to them. The Arikara recognized her as the Corn Mother. She stayed with them for many years and taught them how to live and work on the earth and how to pray. When she died, Corn Mother left the people a corn plant as a reminder that her spirit would always guide and care for them. The Arikara say that the beautiful place where they learned to live was the valley of the Loup River in Kansas. An Arikara story. You hear that? Kansas. Alright, and so you can see how in Christianism, they have Mary, and so-called Latin Americans, Hispanics are very Catholic, most of them, or Christian, right? But the Catholic ones, they worship Mary a lot, man. It's part of, there's processions. Each country has their own Mary, in all these countries you go to, right? their own Virgin Mary. But where does this tradition go back to? As you can see, there's foundational truths behind everything. And you see even in Kansas. All right, so we're not just talking about Mesoamerica. It says here Demeter was the goddess of corn, grain, and the harvest. She was the daughter of Cronus and Rhea. It was believed that Demeter made the crops grow each year. Thus, the first loaf of bread made from the annual harvest was offered to her. So, what did they use to make this bread? Corn. Just like the Jewish do this. The first fruit, they offer it, they don't eat it. All right? Or the Hebrews, right? I'm not talking about today's Jewish. Says here, she was the goddess of the earth, of agriculture, and of fertility in general. Sacred to her are livestock and agricultural products, poppy, narcissus, and the crane. Right? Sounds just like the mother goddess of corn in Native America. It says Demeter was intimately associated with the seasons. Her daughter, Persephone, was abducted by Hades to be his wife in the underworld. In her anger at her daughter's loss, Demeter laid a curse on the world that caused plants to wither and die, and the land to become desolate. Zeus, alarmed for the barren earth, sought for Persephone's return. So you see how deep corn, right? Or it goes into even in this mythology right here, right? So in this Greek mythology. So let's continue. All right, so I found this book. It's interesting. It says a million of facts of correct data and elementary constants in the entire circle of the sciences and on all subjects of speculation and practice by Sir Richard Phillips. It says published by Darton and Clark, 58 Holborn Hill, and to be had of all booksellers, 1840, London. All right, so let's get into this. It says here, Osiris was Dagon, son of Uranus and Ge, and brother of Cronus. So we're correlating with what we read earlier, right? With Dagon. He invented the plow and first cultivated bread corn. Bread corn, all right? Just like the Egyptians lived off of bread, right? We've already proved matzah is corn. So correlating here, it says that he was the first one to cultivate, bread corn, for which he was called Sus Arostrius. All right, so he's also Sus, or in Phoenician, Asti Orotius, Asi Eretz, or Asareth. That sounds like Asareth in America. Asi Ereth, right? The lost tribes went, and Esdras, or Osiris in Egypt. He was killed by Typhoon, his nephew, one of the sons of Cronus, after a reign of 35 years, and buried at Philo. His hieroglyphic was a plow and other implements of agriculture, and plows are for large grain seeds like corn and maize, not for scattered or broadcast style seeds that you can just spread with your hands. Let's go. Continuing, says Isis was either the daughter of Cronus or the concubine of Uranus, whom Dagon married, and the Greeks Ceres, her husband being the inventor of corn, plows, and so corn was first cultivated in Egypt by Isis, or the Ceres of the Greeks. Now, once again, just to remind you, they tell us corn was brought over to the old world by Columbus, so there's not supposed to be any corn in any of these people's mythology or religion or stories. Alright, but once you orientate yourself again with the foundational truth, you know that the old world was on this side, and they're always talking about corn because that's what helped them settle down, right? That was very important to them. It was genetically modified and engineered. And, we have a lot of legends that the gods gave it to the people. So you see, it also in the old world was, highly mentioned in their also religious writings as well. So let's continue. It says corn gods and goddesses. The majority of corn deities are female and associated with fertility. All right, they include the Cherokee goddess Selu, Yellow Woman, and the corn mother goddess Iyatiku of the Kirisan people of the American Southwest, and Chicomecolt of the goddess of maize, who was worshipped by the Aztecs of Mexico. The Maya believed that humans had been fashioned out of corn, and they based their calendar on the planting of the corn field. Male corn gods do appear in some legends.
The Aztecs had a male counterpart to Chicomecolt called Centeolt, to whom they offered their blood each year, as well as some minor corn gods known as the Centzon Totochting or the 400 rabbits. Alright, and just before we continue, again, you see how they have a male counterpart, right? These feminine goddesses, like Isis has Osiris, and he's also a corn god. We're going to read that more on later, and Demeter, right, with her counterpart, and Dagon and his counterpart, right? They all have a counterpart, right? Male and female. Seems the female was first, though. All right, so it continues. It says the seminal figure Fastache, a dwarf whose hair and body were made of corn, was another male corn god. He carried a bag of corn and taught the Seminoles how to grow, grind, and store corn for food. The Hurons of northeastern North America worshipped Eosheha, Eos Eskeha, who made corn, gave fire to the Hurons, and brought good weather. All right. So continuing, it says here from this book, Ancient Egyptian Myths and Legends by Lewis Spence. It says here, the character of Osiris as a deity of vegetation is brought out by the legend that he was the first to teach men the use of corn, and by the custom of beginning his annual festival with the tillage of the ground. He is said also to have introduced the cultivation of the vine. In one of the chambers dedicated to Osiris in the great temple of Isis at Philae, the dead body of Osiris is represented with stalks of corn sprinkling from it, and a priest is depicted watering the stalks from a pitcher, which he holds in his hand, as you can see. The accompanying legend sets forth that this is the form of him whom one may not name, Osiris of the mysteries, who springs from the returning waters. That's like a resurrection. It would seem impossible to devise a more graphic way of depicting Osiris, a personification of the corn, while the inscription attached to the picture proves that this personification was the kernel of the mysteries of the god, the innermost secret that was only revealed to the initiated. Alright, you hear this? In estimating the mythical character of Osiris, very great weight must be given to this monument. The story that his mangled remains were scattered up and down the land may be a mythical way of expressing either the sowing or the winnowing of the grain. The latter interpretation is supported by the tale that Isis placed the several limbs of Osiris on a corn sieve, or the legend may be a reminiscence of the custom of slaying a human victim as a representative of the corn spirit. Alright, so where do these corn mythologies begin? Right, we just read in Mesoamerica how, corn mother and the corn gods we're going to read on later on. And it says here, and distributing this flesh or scattering his ashes over the fields to fertilize them. Alright. So it's here, the Maya maize god. Like other Mesoamerican people, the traditional Mayas recognize in their staple crop, maize, a vital force which they strongly identify. This is clearly shown by their mythological traditions. According to the 16th century Popol Vuh, right? It's like the Mayan Bible, right? You can also read about the creation of the earth, almost just like Genesis in this book. If you take a look, it's available online everywhere. The hero twins have maize plants for alter egos, and man himself is created from maize. The discovery and opening of the maize mountain, the place where the corn seeds are hidden, is still one of the most popular of Maya tales. In the classic period 200 and 900 AD, the maize deity shows aspects of a culture hero. And it says here, basically, and just like Joseph stored corn because he saw the dream come, he told Pharaoh, hey, store some corn for 7 years. And look at the legend here of the Mayas, that they have a mountain of maize waiting to be discovered, right? The legend goes. It says here in this book, Dionysos by Richard Seaford, right? It says initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries culminated in the revelation to those being initiants of an ear of corn, and the ceremony also celebrated Demeter's bestowal of corn on humankind. The meter presides both over the growth of corn from the earth and over the ritual that ensures the happiness beneath the earth of those who have been initiates. Post-mortem happiness is embodied not only in ritual, a mere human construction, but also in nature, in the re-emergence from the earth of what sustains human life, corn, and can only be the gift of a deity. An inscription from 2nd century AD Egypt. Alright, Egypt, ancient Egypt. And continuing in this book is found this like poem or recital, whatever it is. It says, O son Taz, Lord of the world, mighty hero supreme, who subjugates hostility, gladdener of corn, creator of wheat and barley, renewer of the herb, director of the spirits, angels of heaven, or the stars, luminaries. Is that what they're talking about? Thou madest the tablets of destiny. Right, and this is from Ancient Summer, a litany, it says. And continuing from the same book, in reference to that last poem we just read, it says, apparently applied to Tas in Sumerian, thus discovering the Sumerian origin of Dionysus in both name, function, and representation. This also explains for the first time why corn and barley are so frequently figured on the tashio coins of the ancient Britons, and along with tashio on Phoenician coins, and why the popular Hittite divinity Tash-ub, or Tash of the plow, is figured holding stalks of corn on the Hito summer seals, and as a gigantic warrior clad in Gothic dress holding corn stalks and bunches. As you can see in this picture, him holding the corn with the corn on top, the cob. Alright, so we continue to correlate. It says here, the Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom maize cobs, to the 2500 BC to 1781 BC, according to this research, right? I believe in Mr. Gunnar Thompson. It says, a mural from Amenemhet's tomb at 2000 BC. Above it says, presently in the Cairo Museum, the food display on the right includes a typical maize cob, painted yellow with green husk leaves. Pharaohs and wealthy ate immature sweet corn as a fruit. Alright? Field corn that was fed to the masses was not portrayed in royal mortuary art because it was regarded as unclean. Right? So the other corn, right, was fed to the other masses or the slaves, right? Just like the matzah. Alright? It says a new kind of sweet corn, the corn of Osiris, it says here, became popular during the New Kingdom as a magical food of immortality. It came from the Western Duat, or paradise. And we've been correlating what America is, right? The ancient land of the Hebrews, the Old Testament, right? So the promised land or paradise. As it says, the corn came from here. It came from the Western Duat, or paradise. Let's continue. And it says here, on ceremonial occasions, celebrating the resurrection of Osiris, god of the dead, there was a special kind of corn that was served to royalty and to priestly participants. An earthen effigy of the god was impregnated with corn seed, and it was then watered for several months until immature cobs appeared at the very tops of the stalks. So again, at the top, right, like the other guy we just saw holding the stalks, and it shows the corn right on the top. These cobs are almost spear-shaped, right? They certainly look nothing like immature wheat plants. Probably the immature plants were eating as a fruit, because at this stage of arrested development, they would have been very sweet and succulent, just like sweet corn, right? You can eat it raw, actually, before it gets hard, like fresh. It's better. This delicacy is probable the food that had been referred to in Egyptian texts as the corn of Osiris. So every time they're talking about corn of Osiris, they're really talking about sweet corn, right? Because it was new to the other parts of the old world, because that's coming from America, right? Or from certain tribes. And continuing here, it says the maize god, right? The Maya believed in an array of gods who represented aspects of nature, society, and professions. The maize god, whom Hanapu was one of the most important owing to his connection with this vital staple crop. He is shown here as a youthful, handsome man. His headdress is a stylized ear of corn, and his hair is the silk of the corn. The Popol Vuh a sacred Maya book, describes how the gods formed the first humans from a dough made out of yellow and white maize, after their attempts to use clay and wood had failed. The maize god was believed to be decapitated once harvesting began and then reborn at the start of the new growing season. So, doesn't that sound like Osiris? Huh? The corn of Osiris, how he was reborn, renewal, resurrection. Look at the correlation here with maize god. It says the maize god was believed to be decapitated once harvesting began and then reborn at the start of the new growing season. The god was therefore not just associated with maize itself, but also with the cycle of rebirth, just like Osiris, the cycle of seasons, just like in ancient Egypt, just like in ancient Greek, in summer, and the associated growth of crops. His life cycle could also provide the Maya with a way of understanding the human life cycle. So it says here, Native American maize, corn mythology. It says, corn, also known as maize, is the most important food crop of the Americas, cultivated by hundreds of different tribes. Even some tribes who were too nomadic or lived too far north to grow it themselves had corn as part of their diet, since they traded extensively with corn farming neighbors. Corn is one of the three sisters of the northeastern tribes, so called because corn, squash, and beans were traditionally planted together by Native American farmers. So it wasn't just northeast though, I mean, it's a lot of them in different regions of America, even in central and south. So it says corn played an important mythological role in many tribes as well, alright, just like in ancient Egypt, ancient Sumer, ancient Greek, right? In some cultures, corn was a respected deity, while in others, corn was a special gift to the people from the creator or culture hero. So corn was a gift from the creator. We know who, when I talk about our ancient aboriginal real Native Americans, right, who they were, right? Some of them were Hebrew, right? So who's their creator? In addition to its importance as a food source, corn also played a ceremonial role in many tribes, with sacred corn pollen or cornmeal being used as a ritual adornment and spiritual offerings, just like the first fruit of the ancient Hebrews, right? And they still practice today, the proxy Jewish people. Although the word corn comes from a general Old English word for a cereal seed, now this is the bullshit they teach us, right? Related to kernel, the word, we're gonna go into this a little later, I'm gonna show you. The word maize has Native American origins. Okay, the word maize or matzah has Native American origins. It comes from the Spanish version of the indigenous Taino word for the plant maize. The name of several corn dishes also come from Native American languages. Hominy, Pawnee, and Succotash from Eastern Algonquin languages, Segamite from Cree, and Chicha from the Nahuatl or Aztec language. Corn is a common clan symbol in many Native American cultures. Tribes with corn clans include the Muscogee Creek tribe, whose corn clan was named Atchalgi or Vesevilke in the Muscogee language, the Navajo, the Mojave, and the Pueblo tribes of New Mexico, many of whom have multiple corn clans, such as the Blue Corn Clan, Yellow Corn Clan. Many tribes, such as the Caddo and the Pueblo tribes, also have a corn dance among their tribal dance traditions. Alright, you see how important corn is, right? We've already gone through part 1, 2, 3, and now 4 as to why, you know, and how important it is all over the world. Now look at right here, it says Native American corn gods and spirits. There's some of them says Adna, Arikara, Chicha, South American, corn maidens, Kachina, Mana, Hopi, the corn mother, Wabanaki, little giver, Seminole, the Mondamin, Ojibwe, the Selu in Cherokee, the spirit of the corn, Iroquois, an unknown woman in Choctaw. Alright. Alright, and see here some of the Native American legends about corn. So you can pause this if you like, read through it and Google it if you like, you know. So you can read about the different legends and stuff as well. Alright. It says here, Georgia Stories. Green corn, native gold. It says Diamond Brown, a Cherokee dancer, describes how corn is the foodstuff responsible for prehistoric Native Americans flourishing in Georgia. Through interviews, reenactments, and visits to significant Native American sites in Georgia, the story of the changing culture of Indians from their arrival in existence as wandering hunters to the development of mound building culture unfolds. So again, correlating with what we talked about in part 3, corn is the cradle of civilizations. What helped the cradle of civilization flourish and settle down, which was over here in the real old world in America, was corn. Alright, you see here in Georgia's stories also correlating that, right? It helped the wandering hunters to the development of the mound building cultures. Mound building or pyramids, right? Says here in ancient Egyptian religion, Neper, alters Nepra or Nepri, was a god of grain. His female counterpart was Nepit, the goddess of grain. So even this god had a counterpart, a female counterpart, and there was a male counterpart, right? Just like we read earlier, okay? Same thing. Continuing, regarding Neper, it says here in myth, pictured in human form, Nepri is often depicted as a child suckled by Renenutet, right? Nepri's body was dotted to represent grains of corn. The hieroglyphics that write his name similarly include the symbols of grain. Naturally, as Lord of the Mouth, Neper's mother was identified as Renenutet, who gave out the Ren, a person's true name, and who was also identified as source of nourishment. So I just want to point out here, as you can see, Renenutet is the one on the left and in the middle, and on the one on the right is Isis, right? We know Isis is the goddess of corn as well, right? And just to point out, we can see how this evolved in some time as what we call today the Virgin Mary, right? Just like we mentioned earlier, right, about the goddess mother and these stories of the feminine energy of nourishment, right? As you can see where it comes from. So again, it says here, corn mother is also known as corn woman, corn maiden, and yellow woman. A variety of versions of this goddess shows up in a variety of cultures around the world, including Europe, Egypt, we just read, India, and the Americas. Some of the more well-known goddesses are said to be corn mothers, including the Celtic Ceridwen, the Egyptian Isis, and the Greek Demeter or Ceres, right? Or Roman, I believe. Alright, so as you can see, there's a foundational truth behind this, and it's all leading to America, Native America. So continuing about Neper, it says here, once the myth of Osiris and Isis had begun to be told, since Osiris was now a life, death, rebirth deity, in common with many cultures, right? Again, many cultures. His story was associated with the annual harvest and the annual disappearance of any visible life in the crop. Thus, at this point, Neper became considered merely an aspect of Osiris, a much more significant god, gaining the title one who lives after dying. Alright, so it's the same person or same epithet. It's just another epithet, as they say, of Osiris. So again, in conclusion, the figure of Neper is dotted with grains of corn, alright? Corn. And the Nile gods are shown as fat figures with hanging pouch and breast. The same being true of some of the accompanying divinities, an alternation being intended of male and female. And it says here, continuing, it says Osiris, supreme god of resurrection, once again, was a closely associated with the life-giving forces of nature, particularly the Nile and vegetation. Above all, he was connected with germinating grain. And we know what grain they're talking about, right? The emergence of living, growing plant from the apparently dormant seed hidden within the earth was regarded by the Egyptians as a metaphor for the rebirth of a human being from the lifeless husk of the corpse. And we saw that in Native American mythology, same exact thing. The concept was translated into physical form by the fashioning of images of Osiris out of earth and grain. These corn mummies, here we go, corn mummies, were composed of sand or mud mixed with grains of barley. They generally have Osirian attributes and are often represented with an erect penis, symbolizing fecundity, fecundity, however you say that. A few small figures of this type have been found within the wrappings of mummies, but in general, they were not destined for the tomb. The majority were made according to an elaborate ritual which took place during the annual festival of Osiris in the month of Koyak, the fourth month of the inundation season. This was intended to ensure the god's resurrection and, by extension, the continuation of life in Egypt and the maintenance of the ordered universe. The corn mummies were then carefully buried in sacred spots, specially designated for this purpose. And continuing on this book, The Origins of Osiris and His Cult by John Gwynne Griffith, it says, Osiris and corn. In later times, the connection between Osiris and vegetation is often particularized in relation to the growing of grain, as in the Osirian corn mummies. How early does this idea appear? The earliest association of Osiris with corn seems to occur in the dramatic Ramessean papyrus, right? In this papyrus you see right here, it's famous, in a scene where Seth is represented by an ass and Osiris by barley. Horus commands Seth and his followers not to beat his father. Perhaps the act of treason is meant, and this was often done by asses. It must be admitted that, like many other parts of this fragmentary papyrus, the scene is not wholly clear, right? So they're just guessing a lot of parts, admittedly, right? But sufficient emerges from Seth's interpretation to establish the equation, especially line 31, which ends beating Osiris, hacking the god to pieces. They keep saying barley here, but we know what it means. A cryptic summary of the action which follows the command of Horus. The only problem being that the command says the Poseidon deity is mostly Horus, or the Ithyphallic Amun, each of whom in this role seems to have absorbed the fertility aspect of Min. Only once are these deities replaced at Edfu by Osiris. The interpretation suggested for the Osirianized version is that the threshing floor was regarded as at the site of the grave of Osiris in his role of the dead corn god, not barley, corn god, and the calves by their treading of the corn, again not barley, and trampling on the floor were supposed to hide the grave from Osiris' enemies. It may be concluded that these texts do not provide evidence of the god's early association with corn. The dramatic Ramessean papyrus, on the other hand, does. The only reservation one feels impelled to make is concerning the date of its commentary on the right. And continuing from the same book, it says, I guess this is part of the papyrus here on the top. It says, Thou, the king, hast threshed the barley, thou hast reaped the corn. Again, it says, Thou, the king, thus plowed the barley and reaped the corn. An important article by Sharif has attempted to trace the early history of these practices. He refers to the celebrated example in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Carter 82 describes it as comprising a wooden frame molded in the form of that god Osiris, hollowed out, lined with linen, filled with silt from the Nile bed, and planted with corn. And so again, we got corn all over the old world, right? As we can see here in Babylon, all over Egypt, especially in the religious aspect and their mythology, right? As well as in America for the Native Americans. It's all over their mythology and religion as well. So does this go into other religions or in the Bible? It definitely does. So let's just continue to correlate. Let's continue to read, all right? Let's go. Alright, so King Drop brought this up in one of his videos. I thought it was very interesting to my corn investigation. So it says here, the Old Red Land, Huehuetlapayán, was the name of the original home in the north from which the Toltecs migrated. Their leader, Quetzalcoatl, right? Quetzalcoatl, we read earlier his importance and how he was associated with corn, wore a long robe marked with crosses, right? The sign identifies him as the one who crosses. Quetzalcoatl attained the land of promise, and in his golden reign an ear of wheat grew so large that one man could hardly carry it. So an ear of wheat. And if we're talking about Quetzalcoatl, we know we're talking about corn, right? The ear of a corn. Now it continues, says, Joshua led the people into the land flowing with milk and honey, where a single bunch of grapes was a load for 2 men. Moses is placed in a cleft of the rock whilst the Lord goes by, and tradition asserts the print of his body to have been engraved on the stone visible to this day. The impression of the hand of Huemak is likewise said to have been stamped in a rock. So they're associating Quetzalcoatl, right, with Joshua and or Moses here, right? All right, so let's continue. So it says here in the King James Version, Genesis 37, chapter 7, or part 7. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright, and behold, your sheaves stood around about and made obeisance to my sheaf. All right. All right, so we're going to dive into the wording of these passages in the Bible, and when they're referring to corn or when they say grain or sheaves, right? So first with sheaves, let's look into it. So sheaves, right? It says here, when the grain is reaped, it is laid in handful bags of the reaper to be gathered by children or those who cannot stand the harder work of reaping. Says Psalms 129:7. The handfuls are bound into large sheaves, 2 of which are laden at a time on a donkey. Compare Nehemiah 13:15. In some districts, carts are used. Compare Amos 2:13. The sheaves are piled about the threshing floors until threshing time, which may be several weeks after harvest. It is an impressive sight to see the huge stacks of sheaves piled about the threshing floors, the piles often covering an area greater than the nearby villages. The ancient Egyptians bound their grain into small sheaves. All right, so we're correlating this with the Egyptians as well, right? Forming the bundles with care so that the heads were equally distributed between the 2 ends. See Wilkes in Ancient Egyptian 1878, Part 2, 424. Compare Joseph's dream now. Genesis 37:5-8. It says, the sheaves mentioned in Genesis 37:10, 12, and 15 must have been handfuls. It is custom in parts of Syria for the gatherers of the sheaves to run toward a passing horseman and wave a handful of grain, shouting Kemshi, Kemshi, literally handful. They want the horseman to feed the grains to his horse. Of course, they're going to say grains here. We're going to go into grains later on. It says in Old Testament, times forgotten, sheaves had to be left for the sojourner. In Deuteronomy 24:19, compare the kindness shown to Ruth by the reapers of Boaz in Ruth 2:7 and 15. All right, so we know that when they're talking about ancient Egyptian, we're talking about sheaves and bound. Most likely, we're talking about corn. They lived off bread, right? Masa. All right. So to correlate a little bit with what I'm trying to say, I found this on a Masonic website, right? It says here, the Masonic Lodge of Education, your guide to understanding Freemasonry. It says the Masonic sheaf of corn. The Masonic sheaf of corn in King Solomon's day represent part of the wages reaped from the master mason's labors. Today it is used as a symbol of that time, long ago, mostly during the dedication, constitution, and consecration of a new lodge, and in the laying of cornerstones. All right, so this is very symbolic to Masons. At those times, the Masonic sheaf of corn represents the fruit of our labors, our sacrifices, and we all have done to deserve them. So they're teaching this to other Masons. All right. And continuing on the same website, it says, this Masonic website says, the plenty of the harvest. Corn, wine, and oil have been associated with the harvest and the plenty since King Solomon's time and before. Masonic wages. When King Solomon requested of King Tyre the wood, cedar, fir, and algum which came from Lebanon, for which to build the temple, he promised payment of wheat, barley, wine, and oil. Okay, so if you've watched Teach Me to Be Priestly's videos about the cedar, the cedars of God, very powerful. You'll see what is referring to when it talks about that here and when it's referring to Lebanon, right? Place of whiteness. Arseref, right? For now, continues says Masonic charity. The Masonic sheaf of corn represents charity to the less fortunate, as in these excerpts from the Bible. When thou cuttest down thine harvest in thy field, and hast forgot a sheaf in the field, thou shalt not go again to fetch it. It shall be for the stranger, for the fatherless, and for the widow, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the works of thine hands. So they're saying be thankful and share and share what you grow, give it to the needy. That's what it's basically saying in Deuteronomy 24:19. And continuing on the same website, it says, no one knows for sure whether corn, as we know it in the United States, is the exact grain that the Hebrews in Israel during King Solomon's day grew for food. All right, now he's saying no one knows for sure, but we know for sure. How much correlating information, mythology, records, history do we need to compile, especially in the and 4 videos, right, that I made to associated with corn. I mean, come on. Now it says here, however, Duncan's Masonic Ritual and Monitor, written by Malcolm C. Duncan in 1866, uses the word corn because Duncan knew as a Mason. The King James Version of the Bible mentions the word corn over 100 times. Did you know that? Whether this was a generic term to represent any grain used in bread stuffs, or whether the name of the exact type of the grain was lost in one of many translations of the Bible is unknown. But we know better. We know how they change versions on purpose. We know how they rewrite things on purpose to confuse us and throw us away from our foundational truth. Alright? I'm just scratching the surface here, and hopefully you've been following along because we're about to get to the climax. Alright? So let's continue. So again, this is a statement from Michael Wall from the book Corn in the Bible. He says, this is from the back part of the book, it says, corn is featured so heavily in the Bible because the Americas are the lands of the Bible. Right? We've been telling you this from first video. Ears of corn, corn in the husk, green ears of corn, and full ears of corn are not enough to allow them to see that corn in the Bible is a significant key to understanding biblical geography. Okay? You are here. When you have finished journeying with me through corn in the Bible, you will see things that have escaped the eyes of the most learned scholars, professors, historians, and religious leaders. All right, it has escaped the eyes of all of us. All right, we've been indoctrinated to think the Middle East and all that is the Holy Land, right? And that everything happened on that side of the world. The old world is over there, and that's a lie. All right, we are waking up and we're remembering now. All right. Once you orientate yourself, you start finding everything, you start correlating everything, you start seeing the geography, as he's saying, the Bible geography, which is over here on this side of the earth. Alright? So I found this. It says, a new and literal translation from the Hebrew of the Pentateuch of Moses. So literal translation. What does literal mean? You know what literal means, right? Alright, there's no rephrasing here. It says, and the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and offered the halt sacrifice on the 14th day of the 5th month at evening in the commons of Jericho. And they did eat of the corn of the land on the morrow after the halt sacrificed with the unleavened cakes and parched corn the very same day. Again, this is a literal translation, and you see corn. So they're not just saying grains or ears or sheaves, right? They're saying corn, literal translation. So again, just like this question right here in the top, it says, does the Bible have errors? Since it says that corn existed in the Middle East over 2,000 years ago. Now it says the word corn appears 102 times in 94 verses in the King James Bible. How is this possible, since corn was never in the Middle East until introduced from Americas many centuries later, according to the bullshit doctrine that they teach us, right? The false education that Columbus brought it over there. We've already proven that wrong in the past videos, in the first 3 parts. However, you will not find the word corn in any of the modern translations of the Bible, okay? So that's what I wanted to get into. You'll see how they switched the word corn into grain, sheaf, dagon, bar, whatever. Why is this? Here is a list of every instance of the word corn in KJV Bible, listing the original Hebrew and Greek words from which it came. Right? So it says here in Hebrew, and you can see the different references to the the strong lexicons words. So again, we read about Dogon and Dagon right earlier, the god, and it says here Dagon from an unused word for grain of cereals, food or grain, right? Shimbo, Shimbole from the same as H766 40, or ear, right? Ear of grain. Branches, ears, grain. Bar, again, grain, corn, grain, wheat. Shaber, from grain. Kama, standing grain, grown up, standing grain, and we know that corn grows very tall over the shoulders of most people. Um, Quail, Kali is parched roasted grain. Dagan, again, we'll see Gore and Dutch. You can pause it if you want to look at all these different references, right? But we are starting to relate and see that this was really just they were just talking about corn. In reality, if we're talking about ancient Egypt, and we're talking about ancient Egypt in America and the Native Americans, we're talking about corn, right? We're talking about the masa, right? The matzah that the Israelites ate as slaves, right? That's what they fed off, right? Matzah or masa, the maize taino word. Okay. All right. So before I continue, I know a lot of people, because they already had the comment already in one of my videos, says if the maker of this video is referring to corn in the Bible, then he's mistaken. It's a grain and blah 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 blah. The whole explanation that they always give us, right? So I want to bring this up to you so you can see what they try to tell us it is. All right. So, but this rabbi, right away, he admits. Look what he says: is once corn became almost exclusively identified with maize, the Bible translators began to use the word grain for dagan. Now, look what he says. This confusion also had halachic consequences, particularly for those of us Ashkenazi Jews who don't eat corn on Pesach. How did this come about? Rabbi Sushe Joseph Blake explains. So he's going to explain to us, this rabbi who's an Ashkenazi Jew, right? And if you don't know about the Ashkenazi Jews, look for a book. It's called The 13th Tribe. It explains to you how the Jewish of today that are living in the Middle East are Ashkenazi Jews, mostly from Germany, who converted into Judaism, right? And they're not the same ones as the Hebrew or as the Old Testament. So this rabbi is clearly telling you, for us Ashkenazi Jews who don't eat corn on Pesach, they don't eat corn at all. They've never did. They're from Europe. They were not from America. These are not the ancient Hebrews, all right? But let's listen to his explanation, because it's what they try to confuse us with and they try to explain corn away in the Bible. So it says here, the cornucopia of new foods from the New World brought new items, such as maize and potatoes. This is the rabbi's explanation, right? To the fore. Both quickly became staple foodstuffs in the Old World. And although clearly not technically legumes, the question arose as to whether they should nevertheless be included in the category of kitniyos. As it turns out, maize is generally considered to be kitniyos, whereas potatoes are not. Interestingly, the etymology of the names of these foods may give us some insight into this dichotomy. While the common name for maize from the Taino word maíz is corn, in the United States this usage is quite clear. The origin of the word corn is something quite different, according to this rabbi. The word corn can be traced back to the ancient Indo-European grim, or germ, which literally meant a small nugget. Alright? In German, this word became corn, and in Latin it became grain, both of which include any edible grass seed, right? And I can see how that happened, and we saw that Turkish wheat, right, was actually corn. We learned that in the first video. And we know that Gunnar Thompson, he told us, how what the cornucopia really was, and it was related to corn, not just any grass wheat. All right, so this is their bullshit explanation. Let's continue. In practice, these terms refer to whatever the predominant grain happens to be in given country, right? So they're saying that it just whatever the grain was in that country, they called it corn. That's what they teach us, right? In the Americas, it refers to maize. In Scotland, it referred to oats. In Germany, it referred to wheat or rye. And this might have been, this could be true, but later on, Indeed, Old English translations of Pharaoh, insomniac, premonitions refer to 7 sheaves of corn. Now look what he says. Columbus had not yet discovered America during the time of Pharaoh. So Pharaoh was clearly not dreaming of corn on the cob. Okay? Now, we know Encyclopedia Britannica and all this bullshit about Columbus introducing corn to the old world is false. It's bullshit. We've already proven that wrong. Not me. All the scholars you saw in the first 3 videos. Johannesson, Gunnar Thompson, and all the rest. right? We found undeniable proof of it in India, in the old world. We just read the mythology, right, of ancient Egypt, Summer Babylon, corn series, right? The meter, right? Ancient Greek, masa, matzah. So this rabbi is playing stupid, or he's just trying to fool us. All right, he's just trying to confuse us. He knows the truth, and he doesn't want us to know who he is and who we are. All right, so let's continue, because this is all bullshit. I hope you're seeing the bullshit. It says the corn to which he referred was rather one of the 5 grains. Yiddish speakers are similarly prone to this confusion. And he's talking about himself because that's what they are. Yiddish is a German language, not Hebrew. Since they often use the term corn to refer to grain. It seems, however, that the popularity of corn and its resulting assumption of this sobriquet was sufficient for the minhag of kidneys to extend to this new grain. Potatoes, on the other hand, were never regarded by people as a grain and therefore generally considered to have escaped the kidneyos categorization. So, you see this rabbi, the only thing he has in his proof is that Columbus didn't bring it over to the old world. I mean, that it wasn't there before Columbus brought it, right? So that's his only explanation that how it cannot be corn, and that has already been debunked so many ways by us, by other researchers, that I mentioned the first 3 parts. So you see, he ain't got nothing. He's just bullshitting you. All right, he's really stupid, or he's just playing dumb and trying to confuse you, because that's what they do, these rabbis, right? They try to explain the Bible to you, your story to you, your Hebrew ancestry, Israelite ancestry. They try to explain it to you in their words, in their way, from their understanding or bullshit. All right. Once we got that clear, I just wanted to talk about this first before I continue, because everybody's like, oh, they're talking about grain because every part of the world they went in, they just referred to the grass they knew, and that's all bullshit. That's all bullshit. All right. Let's dwell a little bit more deep into this. All right. So again, the se plant, right? It says here, teosinte, right? Or it says se, a genus of plants in the grass family, right? So the best known species of se maize, variously called maize, corn, or Indian corn, right? So it is from the grass families, right? So that's why it's easy for them to confuse us and try to tell us what it means, but we know better now. So it says one of the most important crops for human societies over much of the world, not just America, much of the world. Several wild species are commonly known as teosyntes and are native to Mesoamerica. Again, native to Mesoamerica. Ancient Egypt had corn, ancient Babylon had corn. Now you know where they were. Alright, so again, we get the reference of grain a lot in the Bible, right? Like the rabbi is trying to say it doesn't mean corn, but as it says here, maize, also known as corn, right, is a large grain plant first domesticated by indigenous peoples in southern Mexico about 10,000 years ago. All right, so it's a large grain. So when they talk about grains in the Bible, how do we know they're not talking about corn? We have to rely on somebody to tell us what it means or what they're saying. We know better now. We know that it was on this side. We know when we're talking about the Old Testament, ancient Egypt, they're talking about corn for real. All right, this large grain. It is a grain. Right? It says the leafy stalk of the plant produces separate pollen and ovuliferous inflorescences or ears, right? Ears. We hear the reference of ears in the Bible a lot, which are fruits yielding kernels, right? Kernels or seeds, right? Just like the rabbi tried to explain. Maize has become a staple food in many parts of the world, with total production surpassing that of wheat or rice. All right, very important. Staple food in many parts of the world. However, not all of this maize is consumed directly by humans. Some of the maize production is used for corn ethanol, animal feed, and other maize products such as cornstarch, corn syrup. The 6 major types of corn are dent corn, flint corn, pot corn, popcorn, flour corn, and sweet corn. Many types of corn. Alright, so we read here, corn kernels are the fruits of maize. Maize is a grain. Again, maize is a grain. So when they're referring to grain, why not corn? Why can't it be corn too? Come on, in so many ways. And the kernels are used in cooking as a vegetable or a source of starch. The The kernel comprised endosperm, germ, pericarp, and tip cap. One ear of corn, again, ear of corn, contains roughly 800 kernels in its 16 rows. Corn kernels are readily available in bulk throughout maize-producing areas. They have a number of uses, including food and biofuel. All right, so knowing all this, so let's continue. Let's take a look at these verses. It's here. Look at the different comparisons in the different versions. Now it says here, the first one, Genesis 41:35, and it says, "And they store up the grain for food." And the King James version is actually, "They lay up corn under the hand." And on the international, New International Version says, "And these are store the grain under authority." So you see how they switch the words, right? King James Version still has corn. And you can see the different examples here: Genesis 41:49, Genesis 42:3, Genesis 42:25, Genesis 45:23, Nehemiah 13:12, Psalms 4:7, Psalm 65:9, Psalm 68:24, Isaiah 36:17, and these are just a few examples. There's many verses in the Bible that are talking about corn and corn, and they try to tell us they're not. These rabbis are trying to tell us they're talking about some other cereal, but we know better now, all right? All right, so just another reference here is right in here. It says Isaiah 17:5 says, "And it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn, and reapeth the ears with his arm, and it shall be at that gathereth ears in the valley of Rephaim." So this is from the King James Version, and you can see how they relate ears with corn, right? Ears, right? Ears. We're going to read about what that means later. Now, it says here, Exodus 22:6. I got two versions, right? It says, "The fire breaks out in cash and thorns, so that the stacks of corn, or the standing corn, or the field be consumed therewith. He that kindled the fire shall surely make restitution." And we know from the first parts of the videos that a lot of the times corn was called tall wheat, or standing wheat, or field wheat. And so as you can see, the New International Version, the same verse that says, "If a fire breaks out and spreads into the thorn bushes, so that it burns shocks of grain," right, or standing grain, or the whole field, "the one who started the fire must make restitution." You see how they switch the words up, but they're really talking about the same thing, because corn is a grain. And we know when we're talking about Old Testament, again, in ancient Egypt, we're talking about America, right? All right, so I hope you got this so far clear, what I'm trying to say and what I'm trying to show. All right, so when you see the many references of ear, and when they're talking about plants or grains in the Bible, they're talking about corn, right? Because as the etymology of ear says here, there's two different versions, right? The definitions. Of course, ear is what we can hear with, our the part of our body that we can hear with, right? An organ of hearing, right? I also, ear, as you see in the bottom, it says a grain part of corn, right? Ear is a grain part of corn. Spike, ear of grain, right? Or ear of grain, from Proto-Germanic ak. All right, so it does relate to corn as well. Ears are usually, when they're talking about an plant, they're talking about the ears of corn. So again, as it says here, ear, third person singular, simple present ears, present participle, earring, simple past and past participle, eared. So intransitive it says, "to put forth ears," in growing, to form ears, as grain does. As it says here, noun, ear. As a noun, ear is referring to of corn, an ear of corn. Okay, so when we see ear in the Bible, all right, we're talking about corn. No, not just any grain. Talking about corn. So again, just another example of how they switch the words around. It says here in Deuteronomy 23:25 on the top, King James Version, it says, "When thou comest into the standing corn of thy neighbor," and the bottom version says, "If you enter your neighbor's grain field," right? And the top again, it says, "Then you mayest pluck the ears with thine hand." Pluck the ears. I mean, that's how you pluck corn in a field, in a farm, right? You got to pluck the corn, right? And on the bottom version, it says, "You may pick kernels with your hand." So they don't use ears, they use kernels, which is the same thing. What is corn is kernel, a little kernel. When you're saying kernel, you're usually referring to corn. Again, the top, "But thou shalt not move a sickle unto thy neighbor standing corn." And in the bottom it says, "But you must not put a sickle to their standing grain." Now you see how they switch up words, but they're really just talking about corn. Don't be fooled by the different versions. Try to always go way back, way back. Okay, so hopefully now we can start talking logically about when we read about corn in the ancient world or in the Old Testament, that we're really talking about corn. So now, as it says here, it says, now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said unto his sons, why do ye look upon one another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die. And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt. That's Genesis 42, 1-3. So this is when the supposed famine was taking place. There was 7 years of prosperity and then 7 years of famine. And in the dream that Joseph had, if you read that part of the Bible, he told Pharaoh, he predicted, because Pharaoh wanted him to interpret his dream because he was so troubled by it. And Joseph was the only one that could interpret it right. So this is during the time of famine and the Israelites, right? And Jacob, and then this is after Joseph had been sold by his brothers. He is already living with the Egyptians and basically the Pharaoh's right-hand man, basically almost running Egypt for him, So he's saying, go to Egypt and get corn. Go ahead. They're in the Americas, remember? Native Americans. So we got to stop separating the two. They're together. These two ideas, these two people are the same. So he said, go to Egypt and get corn, right? So they don't die, so they may live and not die. All right, so it says, continuing, this is the reason for the great journey, which led to the reunion with the brother who had been sold as a slave and to the migration of the, page 103, Israelites into Egypt. The viceroy brought his father, brothers, and other relatives into the country, all the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, where there were 70, and they came into the land of Goshen. Genesis 46, 27, 28. The viceroy had obtained permission from the highest authority for his family to cross the frontier, and what the Bible records corresponds perfectly with the administrative procedure of the government. Alright, and right here it says, if there had been patent laws 4,000 years ago, the Egyptians could have claimed exclusive rights over granaries. The silos in Canadian and American wheat farms are still built on the same principle. You hear that? They're still built on the same principle. It's the same place, so why wouldn't it be, right? Admittedly, Egyptians' silos did not reach the same gigantic proportions, according to them, but granaries, because we have again, if you remember the Maya myth, that they have a mountain of corn lying somewhere to be found, right? A mountain. But continuing, it says, but granaries circulating buildings about 25 feet in diameter with ramps leading up to the feeder were not uncommon on the Nile. Right? We're relating that to the Mississippi or somewhere here in the America, the Amazon. As a grand vizier, Joseph built granaries. Genesis 41:48. And a slave laborers, his descendants, built granaries in the land of Goshen. So in the bottom, see figure 19, corn silos in Egypt. So this is, I guess, the Israelites coming and buying the corn, right? During the time of famine. And it says here, figure 16, selling corn to Semites from Canaan, right? They had come from Canaan, right? So in the same book or website that I found the previous information, I also found this drawing, right? And it says, figure 20, catching quails on the Nile. And I'm going to show you how this was, because I noticed something, and we're relating this to Mississippi. So just listen to what it says here. So this picture right here is from the Mississippi River, and I'm going to tell you what this guy is doing. So it says here, in the highlighted part, it says, the St. Francis River and Mississippi River are in the immediate flyway of this property. Wild quail are abundant throughout the property. So they're telling you in this website that quail is abundant in the Mississippi River, right? And what does this image tell us again? This Egyptian, it says, figure 20, catching quails on the Nile. Same thing, right? It's abundant in the Mississippi, and it was seen to be abundant in the Nile. Same thing. Again, ancient Egypt was on this side of the earth, the Americas. Alright, so Well, now I can get into the New Testament, right? Even though I know its background and the truth behind the New Testament, I'm not gonna get into that in this video. But in the New Testament, as you can see in this billboard in this farm country, right, in the United States, in the New Testament, it clearly states that Jesus and his disciples were walking through the, in the King James version, of course, they're going to say the cornfield. In the other version, will say the grain fields, the wheat fields, right? And that's why they draw him here holding the wheat. And it says they plucked the corn and ate it right there. Or they say in English, they ate the weed. All right, so what makes sense? I'm going to show you guys. I mean, what does make sense? You know, like eating fresh corn, sweet corn, or eating raw wheat. All right, so let's get into it. All right, so look how it describes what the corn here. It says Mark 4:28, for the earth bringeth forth fruit of herself. First the blade, right? The blade. If you look at a corn leaf, it looks like a sword or a blade, very sharp, right? Then the ear, right? The ear, then the ear, right? After that, the full corn in the ear. All right, so Matthew 12:1. We're going to read the two different versions, one from King James Version, the other one from the New International Version. So it says here in Matthew 12:1, at that time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered, and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. Right? In the bottom here, the New International Version says, Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Well, I noticed that people go to church on Sunday mostly, the day of the sun, not the Sabbath. So I don't even know what they mean, the Lord of the Sabbath. But anyways, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, right? The grain fields. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. All right, so we're going to read about eating wheat and eating corn. All right, so let's continue. So can we eat corn raw? All right, so it says here, sweet corn kernels can be used much like a vegetable rather than as a cereal grain, okay? In general, its whole or section of the cob may be served as a main dish. If you desire so to use only kernels in the cooking, then slice through the kernel base along the central woody core to separate seeds from the cob. Now it says here, very important, farm fresh, milky stage sweet corn can be enjoyed as it is without boiled or steamed. They're telling you can eat sweet corn fresh, right out the plant. The whole corn cob may be grilled and served with salt, lemon, and pepper seasoning. The whole cob may be steamed or boiled in salt water and served with butter or oil. Boiled kernels are an excellent accompaniment to salads, pizza, pastas, risotto, stews, omelets, fried rice, rice pilaf, etc. So, you can eat sweet corn raw.
This is Hobo Rishayan. Ahora I'm in northeast Pennsylvania. And I'm here in the cornfield, or la milpa, like they say in Spanish. This is the month of August, and the corn is ready. At least it's ready for a hobo to eat. You know, this is cow corn, what they call cow corn, but it is totally edible by humans, and it's really very, very good. This is not completely at full ripeness, but that's how you want it to eat because it gets hard really, really quick. And we're gonna open one up here. Not easy to open up. You see what it looks like? Looks great, man. It looks great. Just ready to eat. And you can eat it. Sweet. Very good. Raw. You don't have to cook it. Very, very good. High in thiamine, niacin, potassium, magnesium. Each cup, which is 153 grams, gives you 17% of your daily need of vitamin C. Really very good. Raw corn right from the field. Really, really good.
Alright, so the hobo helped us see that you can eat raw corn. Now remember, it says here, Jesus and his disciples in the cornfield. You see how they show wheat, right? Now, I mean, how healthy is it to eat wheat raw, right? As it says here, eating grain on the Sabbath. The image is is a raw scan and may need additional cleanup or color correction, says here, but it doesn't talk about what it's doing. But you can see them eating wheat, raw wheat. You see how they're bending over because it's really short, and you know corn is tall. So all right, let's go into eating wheat. And it says here in a quote, it says, how healthy is it to consume raw wheat or grains? Grains are extremely hard, and unless you are a horse, are next to impossible to chew with a human teeth. The closest relative to Homo who lived at need partially on grains were the various Paranthropus species. Here is the particular reconstruction skull of a Paranthropus boy say. Continues, says, see how big are his teeth, how thick the jaws, the cheekbones are super wide, and there is a crest on top of the head to attach the super powerful muscles needed to chew such hearty fare. Besides, raw whole grains are nearly impossible to digest and offer very little nutrition. Alright, so why would it be, this Jesus and his disciples be eating raw wheat? Makes more sense that they're talking about corn. You can pick the corn out of the cob as you saw the hobo. Grains need to be at least boiled until softened and until the amid content has been turned into something edible that can be digested and assimilated. Indeed, the act of grinding flour or bashing the grain in very small pieces, followed by the various processes that turn these into mush, polenta, bread, flatbread, pasta, etc., are basically methods to make the grains fully edible, so that we can eat them to best results in terms of nutrition. So there's no nutrition eating raw wheat.
I'm Big Willie Turner, and we'll eat some raw wheat that hasn't even ripened yet from a wheat field. Hopefully the dog hasn't pissed on it. Tastes like shit. Oh, you.
So again, you saw that little boy's reaction from eating wheat, and that's what most people will do if you start eating raw wheat. So it makes more sense, as it says here, that Jesus was walking through cornfields, not grain fields or wheat fields. All right, they'll give you the truth a little bit of the time, like the King James version, but then they'll try to explain it off in different ways, like the rabbi did. All right, so let's continue. All right, and this is from livestrong.com. It says how to eat raw corn on the cob. It says corn on the cob is an abundant crop in the Midwest, and it is at its peak in the summer months. Corn is a good source of vitamin B1 and folate, as well as vitamin C and dietary fibers. You can cook corn on the cob in several ways, including grilling, roasting, boiling, and Hawa. Shalom, Shabbatah, peace up tribe. Yes, the final video of the corn video series, part 4 of this lesson. And I just wanted to finish this series before I continued with my other videos and topics that I'm currently working on. First of all, just a little recap of the first 3 parts. Now, we already know and learned corn was not introduced to the old world by Columbus. We have shown and proven it existed way before he came to America and supposedly brought it back with him, right? Like Encyclopedia Britannica teaches us today. That's a complete lie. We've already proven that. We showed countless records of maize or corn in existence in India, Europe, Asia, Egypt, Babylon, Africa, etc., basically everywhere, before any Columbus ships arrived to America. Alright, in part 3 we actually showed how corn was a key factor through agriculture, which helped early nomadic people settle down and start civilizations, towns, cities, grouping up, making pueblos. We know corn is native plant to America, and so with that we know that when we read these tales and tablets of the ancient peoples, their hieroglyphs, their stories, their gods, mythology, and their rise to civilization, that it was over here on this side of the world, and which later on was brought over to the other side as mythology or the age of the gods, right? They're just retelling a story, when the land was connected, most probably. In every part of this series, we read how maize or corn was one of the first plants grown, and it was given to the people by the gods. There's a lot of mythology and legends. They talk about, the gods gave it that. We're going to see that with the Native Americans as well, and how it was somehow genetically modified to become the corn that we have today. Mysteriously, they don't know who did it. From a simple plant called teosinte. Corn doesn't grow wild, we read, right? So it needs our help to grow it, man's. So we're gonna, dive more into this on this video and make a final correlation, which is why I first started this series, that corn is all over the Bible, the Old Testament. And of course, this would be no mystery to us who have been taking this journey of reawakening and remembering, because we know that, the true Hebrews, right, the so-called lost tribes and the Old Testament were on this side of the world, if you've seen my past videos, right? So before I start, I would like to just address a statement or comment someone made on one of these corn videos I uploaded. He says,
from our family in Poland.
Og se, det er sådan noget korn. Jeg ved ikke, om det er rådent eller ikke frisk.
Jeg tror, det er frisk. I think it's fresh.
Jamen, der var noget hår oppe i toppen.
Okay, som her det top, som noget hår oppe i toppen.
Ja. Jeg havde i hvert fald lidt oppe i toppen.
Wow, super cool. Super rart at tænke. Test. Ja. Sådan altså. Ja. Hvordan smager det, Simon? How does it taste?
Sådan lidt hvidmelagtigt.
Okay, like a small, like white flour. Som hvid mel, altså.
Ja. Det
Okay.
mener jeg faktisk.
Så det er nok hvede, så vi har fat i her.
Hvide?
Ja. Byg, det er nok ikke byg, altså. Det er nok hvede. Vi har derovre. Wheat in English.
so as we just saw, that small boy had a hard time just getting one kernel out, just getting it out, and so he can try it. And when he tried it, he said it's very hard. You can tell he's like forcing to eat. I mean, that's not how you eat. We just read you don't eat wheat raw. All right, his dad's making him do it. His dad should have done it. So continuing, it says here, sweet corn nutrition facts. Sweet corn is a particular maize species which differ genetically from the field maize. Its kernels are tender, delicious, and eaten as a vegetable in many cuisines worldwide. So as we read in other parts in the beginning of this video, there was a difference between the corn that Pharaoh ate, which was more like a fruit, the corn of Osiris, right? And that which the slaves or the masses ate, which was the field corn. It was different, right? Just like it says here. In contrast to the traditional field corn, sweet corn crops are harvested while their corn ears have just attained the milky stage. All right, the cob either used immediately, so you can eat it immediately, right away, or frozen for later use, since its sugar contents turn quickly into starch. Corn is native to Central Americas, which then introduced to the rest of the world through Spanish explorers. Again, there goes the bullshit that we have taught all the time. Sweet corn differs genetically from the field maize by mutation at the sugary locus. All right, that looks so good. All right, so what have we learned, right? What have we noticed, right? That you can eat sweet corn, you can eat corn raw, but you can't eat wheat or any other of the grains raw. So again, Matthew 12:1. At that time, Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn, and his disciples were an hungered. and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. In a different version here, at the time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, his disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. So now with your knowledge and what you've noticed, your logic, you know they're talking about corn, right? And so if they're talking about corn in the Old Testament and New Testament, they were talking about this side of the earth, all right, where maize is native to, right? All right, so if we're talking about Jesus, right, I mean, are we really talking about our historical biblical Jehoshua, right, or Joshua, right, as it says here in the Old Testament? All right, Joshua 5:11, and they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn in the self same day. Joshua 5:12, and the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. So, we've reached the end of this corn series, and I hope you see what I was trying to tell you the whole time, you know. I hope you enjoyed this part 4 and all 4 parts of this series, and I hope you see that, you know, not only did I show scripture, but I've also shown in all the parts historical data, undeniable proof, corroborating information when it comes to maize and maize in the old world, in the Old Testament, and how important it's been for us as humans, this gift that was given to us, this plant that was genetically modified so we can grow it and live off it and get our nutrition and make our bread and our food, right? And I hope you see that it did help us settle down and create civilizations. So this happened on this side of the earth. This is a tool you can use. If you want any scholar to try to tell you that the old world is on that side, I mean, just show him all 4 of these videos. Let him disprove any of the stuff in this video. Alright? There's a lot of homework we have to do. I wanted to get this corn subject out of my head into this videos. It took me 4 parts. I never knew it was going to take me 4 parts. I thought it was just going to be one simple video. But I just kept finding more and more things correlating, right? So I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope it was educational to you. If you don't believe it still, I hope it was interesting, at least entertaining for you. In the back of the mind, it will start playing its importance, and you'll start seeing it, how important it is, like how I see it. So I look forward to the rest of the videos. Thank you again for being here, taking this journey with me. Stay tuned for Hebrew copper-colored Aboriginal Tribes of America Part 3. I have a lot more corroborative information, evidence, a lot more books that I went into, proving who was over here, what color they were, you know, and who were the real Aboriginals of America. Alright? So stay tuned. Alright? Shalom. Heya, heya. So don't let them fool you. Oh no, you got a mind of your own.